Welcome to Speculating Wildly About Crime. I'm Jamie. I'm going to be your host. And tonight we're going to be covering the case of Emma Fillipoff. So I want to thank one of our listeners, Chrislyn Peterson. Hopefully I said your name right. Come for me if I didn't. I think we actually have back-to-back recordings of your recommendations. I never knew anything about this case, and I know she had mentioned it's going to be wild, it's a rabbit hole, and it definitely was. I thought I got to the end, and then I stumbled across a 10-part, each one an hour long, podcast that covered this case. So definitely lots and lots to talk about. This case takes place in Victoria, British Columbia, which I believe is an island on the west coast of Canada. And we're going to be going back to 2012. This is very, very well known in Canada from what I've read about, and some people even compare it as like Canada's Maura Murray case because of all the crazy stuff that went into it. Before we get into her disappearance, I do want to give everybody a little bit of background on Emma. She actually grew up in Perth, Ontario, which is on the east side of Canada. So think about it, the United States, like New York to essentially California. Perth, Ontario was the quintessential little town, close-knit community. Everybody knew everybody, everybody loved everybody. Emma was one of four, so she had three other siblings. Her mom was a school teacher. Her dad was a part-time painter. He had a little bit of an artistic flair. Emma kind of adopted that, if you will, as she grew up. She was more of the artsy type as well. She loved taking pictures. She was just like one of those free spirits. I know I hate using that word, but she was that type of person. But in the same sense, she was also very magnetic. Like everybody that met Emma wanted to hang out with Emma, wanted to always be around her. She had tons of friends. Essentially a pretty good life until she got into her teen years. Her parents went through a really rough separation. I believe her father was having an affair. The mom got really angry about it, of course. I think one night they even got into a physical argument. And at that point, Emma ended up having to call the police on her mother. And from there on out, she grew apart from her mother and became a little bit of a daddy's girl. But it was also at this time that Emma started to become a little bit nomadic. So this was in her later teens, and she would often stay with friends or stay with other family members and wasn't always at home. Emma was 25 at the time, and she had said, you know what, I had enough of this life. I know some friends on the West Coast. I might go to school out there. And so she decided in late 2011 that she was going to move to Victoria. She made the cross-country pilgrimage, and when she went there, she didn't have a place to call home. So she lived this very nomadic lifestyle. She lived with one friend for a couple months, and then that friend helped her get her own place for a couple months, and then she lived on a guy's boat for a while. She couch surfed for a while. Eventually, she actually ended up staying at a women's shelter for a little bit as well. Another thing I want to make note of with Emma, and this was especially alarming, I guess is the word. Emma didn't believe in cell phones. She never had a cell phone. She never wanted a cell phone. In fact, anytime she would communicate with friends, even when she was back home in Perth, she communicated pretty much only through email. I could not imagine, I'm pretty glued to my phone, but I could not imagine not having it.
I have immediate anxiety. I'm at home.
Right.
Just the thought of it.
Well, and that coupled with you don't really have like a home. So if something goes wrong, nobody knows how to get a hold of you, where you are, nothing. So it was kind of crazy to me. The other thing that was an Emma-ism, I guess I'll say, is even when she did communicate with her friends and family via email, it was always very like poetic and cryptic. It never said, hey, how was your day? It would be something like, I woke up today and the rain was falling down, 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 down. Hope you're not down today. It was just oddities, not a normal way that you would conversate. But her friends and family all knew that's how she communicated, and they came to just accept it. And that was Emma. The other thing I wanted to talk about that was noteworthy, I'll say, she had a really extreme diet. She didn't like to eat meat. She didn't like to eat fruits because they came from trees. She basically for a while lived on a diet of like popcorn and soy, and she really liked mustard. She only drank water. She was very much like the type of artsy person who would be, oh, this tree spoke to me, and so I'm not going to take from this tree. I can only take from this type of plant, and I'm not going to damage the earth. Things always spoke to her, and everything happened for a reason. I think maybe 6 months into her living there, when she was living on this houseboat, one of her friends had run into her at one point and said, "You're eating fish? That's weird. You never eat fish." And she's like, "Yeah, I woke up one day and the fish spoke to me and they said that's what I should eat." The other thing that I think is noteworthy here, she was not one who liked to do drugs. She was super against drugs. She was very adamant against people that did it. And she was against drinking for the most of the time, but there was a point in time in 2012, early in the year, where she was drinking vodka quite a bit, but then that dissipated months later. I want to talk about some of the days leading up to the disappearance. First thing I will note is she did spend a lot of time in a women's shelter in Victoria. This was a type of women's shelter that you had to have a reason to go there. Now, some people said that she went there because she felt like she was in danger. Some people thought that she was maybe being stalked. Nothing was ever officially documented. And when she would stay there, you really could only stay like a week or two at a time. So she would stay for a little bit and then she'd have to go somewhere else. She did befriend a woman there, and that woman got to know her pretty well and said that she could definitely see her mental health deteriorate a little bit. There were some points where maybe she would go outside and pick leaves, and she would put the leaves in a specific pattern. It was very adamant about how they had to be in a pattern. At one point in time, she was said to take all of the furniture out of the house in the place that she was staying at, and said that it was talking to her, so she needed it outside. She also was reported as being very agitated, really anxious and nervous a lot. A few days before her disappearance, November 21st, she had called to set up a tow truck to come and get her van. While she stayed at this women's shelter, there was a hotel a couple blocks down, a couple doors down, where she kept this van. She used it more so for storage and maybe a place to sleep when, she didn't have a bed for the night. Now, one thing that was really odd, she was seen going into YMCA. They said maybe she was purchasing a membership. This footage that I'm about to show you is from November 23rd. This is Emma at a local YMCA. Again, this is just 5 days before she disappeared. And there's no sound with this, so you won't hear anything. So maybe if we want to talk about what we see here. So we see her coming in, and she's dressed in layers, I would say. Then we see her coming out, going out the door, coming back in, going back out, coming back in again, kind of standing at the doorway, looking out a little bit, going back out again, and then coming back in. I want to say she went in and out 4 or 5 times.
It looks like she was waiting for someone.
Right. So some people say waiting. Others say, was she looking for someone? Could she be looking out for someone that was following her?
When I say waiting, it's like maybe she was waiting to meet up with someone.
Like she told somebody, "Hey, I'm going to go buy this YMCA membership and I'm going to be there at 12:30. Come and pick me up."
Almost like, I don't know if we said inside or outside, so maybe I'll keep going back to check.
You could see yourself doing this.
Yeah.
So fairly normal behavior, but we do see her go in and out 6 times in about a matter of less than a minute, we'll say.
But did she ever approach the actual desk or speak with anyone?
The video was so fast, but in the beginning you can see her going up to the desk, and when the police did finally go get this video, they said she did indeed buy a membership that day. I guess that is something to put a pin in, the fact that she bought a membership at the YMCA this day. The very next day starts this back and forth phone conversation with her mother. On the night of November 24th, Emma calls her mom in tears and says, Mom, I need to come home. I just need your help. And her mom is like, whatever you need, Emma. Do you want me to come out there? No questions asked, type of thing. I'll buy you a ticket. It'll be waiting for you at the airport. Just go there tomorrow and we'll do this. And they went back and forth, I want to say, for like 2 or 3 days, where then Emma would wake up the next day and say, No, 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 Mom, I don't need anything. It's fine. I'm good. And then she'd call back later that day or the next morning and say, Mom, I need you. I can't do this anymore. I just need your help so bad. And just crying and in tears. They went back and forth about 4 times in a matter of 2 days. So then we go into the day that Emma goes missing, 4 days later on November 28th. So that morning, Emma calls her mother again at 4:23 a.m. and says, Mom, don't come today. I don't need you. It's fine. She calls her from the women's shelter. And they know this because if she wanted to use the phone at the women's shelter, she would have to go in this room and sit next to a desk with somebody and they would like hear part of the conversation that was going on. Little does Emma know, her mom is like, fuck this. I don't know what's going on. I'm just going to go out there myself. So on this same day, Emma's mom, Shelly, arranges to get a flight and fly across the country, essentially. So I was at 4:23 a.m. Within an hour and a half, Emma's seen on surveillance camera leaving the women's shelter. At 8:30 a.m., she's seen going to a local 7-Eleven and she buys a $200 prepaid credit card and she uses her bank account. Now, her bank account had about $3,000 in it because Emma had a seasonal job. At the time of her disappearance, she wasn't working because it was off season. I'm going to show you another video because we got surveillance of her at the 7-Eleven that day. So again, this video has no sound. So we see the clerk here. We see Emma come up. Again, dressed similarly to how she was. You see her purchase the thing. And then you see her kind of peering outside the door.
Whether there was an actual threat, it definitely seems like there was paranoia. Was she waiting and looking for somebody to come and get her, or were they supposed to meet there?
Did this behavior seem different to you than when she was at the Y?
You can explain it either way.
True. It's
What
like one of those things, if you search hard enough on the internet, you'll find it to say it, right?
I think the main missing piece is whoever she was trying to meet up with or looking out for, because those could be two polar opposite things, depending on was this a kind somebody in her life or.
And spoiler alert, we never find out one way or the other. Nothing officially in a police report. Put a pin in it. We're going to talk about some folks in a little bit.
But I will say, nothing that I've seen so far is screaming to me alarming.
Yeah, except for why do you buy a $200 prepaid card when you have $3,000 sitting in your bank account? My mind immediately went to drugs. And then I was like, well, no, she was super adamant against drugs. So that couldn't have been it.
You would use cash for that anyway.
Yeah, unless your drug lord was like, I need a Visa card to purchase whatever. I don't know. I don't talk to drug lords.
By the time we get to speculations, I will have ideas of why you would need a prepaid credit card. Because you're right, if it was some kind of online activity, you can't use cash. Did she have other credit cards?
Yeah, she paid for that prepaid credit card with her bank card. We'll put a pin in it because it's going to get crazier in just a second. So she leaves that 7-Eleven. She does the whole peering out thing and eventually leaves there, right? Now, what happens between now and the next event that we see on camera is a lot of speculation, but a lot of people say they think she visited the library around noon that day. She loved to go to the library. She liked to just hang out there, read books, write in her journal. So we can say she probably was at the library at some point. And there will be some evidence to point to that in a little bit. There were also probably about 3 or 4 accounts of people seeing her randomly that day, like on the street or walking somewhere. Some people said she looked fine. Some people said she looked wet and tired and sad or manic. It wasn't until later that day, At 5:54 p.m., she goes back to that same 7-Eleven, and now she goes in there to buy a cell phone, again with her bank card. And remember, she hated cell phones. She never had a cell phone. She didn't want a cell phone. But now we have a cell phone that she's bought and a $200 prepaid Visa card. And again, when she's leaving the 7-Eleven, you see her doing this peering out the door and not really wanting to leave and being a little bit what I'll call agitated. So that interaction is brief. And she is seen coming back to the shelter at around 6 o'clock that night. Now, one of the interviews that I listened to said when she came back, they told her that there were no beds open. And she went to go talk to her friend at the shelter and was upset about it. And her friend went back up to the shelter and said, "You got to find a way to make a bed for Emma, just like whatever you need to do." And this is when the shelter said she was exhibiting some behaviors of somebody with mental health issues or even schizophrenia. For whatever reason, they can't find her a bed. So she's getting ready to leave. And it said, again, not in official police reports, but comes from this friend she lived with at the shelter, said that she got notification that somehow the shelter knew that her mom was coming that day. Shortly after 6 p.m., she said, "Fuck it, I need to get away from this shelter." That's when she goes outside, hails this taxi at 6:10 p.m., gets in the taxi and says, "Please take me to the airport." He says, "Sure, no problem, but it's going to be $60. And she goes, "Whoa, wait, time out. I don't have enough money for that. Can you just take me essentially where you picked me up," type of thing. She starts talking to him and they hit it off. And she's like, "Can I just stay in here? Because it's November. It's fucking cold outside." And he's like, "Sure, but I'm working. So once I get a call, you're going to have to leave." So she's in there for maybe 20 minutes. And this taxi driver does get questioned by police later. And he states that she was exhibiting signs of what he called mental illness. So he said that she seemed very agitated. She was kind of like murmuring or talking to herself. She was getting freaked out about small things. I also thought it was odd that she said, "I can't pay for the $60 cab ride, even though I'm so adamant to go to the airport. And I have $3,000. I mean, minus 200 in a cell phone now, but I have $3,000 sitting in my bank account." Now, some people speculated it was because she was saving up for a big trip that she was going to take to Japan, if I remember right. So maybe that's why she didn't want to spend her money on the $60 cab ride. But if you're that much in distress and you really want to get the fuck out of there, $60 is a drop in the bucket. And it seems like your mom was going to pay for everything anyway. So you probably could ask her for that $60. And the other thing that I thought was odd was, so you're going to get in this cab and you're just going to go to the airport and hope that you can get a ticket. You don't have your passport. You don't have any of your shit from the van with you. Again, never lived a nomadic life. Haven't had severe mental illness, so I don't know. Maybe that is how you would think in that state of mind.
I get that she's saving up for this trip, but she clearly had regular money coming in. So why not have a home base?
One of her friends said that maybe it was because she liked to live this simple life. Like, I don't need a big fancy house to stay in. I can just stay with friends and maybe buy them dinner, buy them a bottle of booze. And
But
that's
I
the
would,
world speaking to me.
the world can speak to you all at once, but I would imagine this is me, and she and I are very different people. But for
Right.
me, the insecurity of that would make me
Be more agitated,
crazy.
right?
It would push me over the edge, not knowing where I was going to sleep tonight or if I was going to find a place to sleep tonight. I can't imagine that does good things to your psyche, even if that's the life that you've chosen. I feel like at some point that life has to turn on you.
So, could we speculate that maybe part of the reason she wanted to live that is if we go down this path of she did feel like she was being stalked and she did feel like she was being followed. She needed to be nomadic, so that person didn't know where she was ever.
Yeah, but at the same time, if there is this boogeyman out there, are you not putting your friends in danger?
Yeah, true.
Or I would imagine if she kept going back to the women's shelter, I'm sure there was some kind of therapist or social worker or
Right.
something there. If they won't even let you make a phone call by yourself, they had to be asking questions like, why are you back?
Yeah, like what
What
happened?
is your
And
plan? What is your next step?
that's the whole point of shelters like that, right? Like, how can we help you get back on your 2 feet? Oh, you're being stalked. Okay, let's get the police involved. Knowing everything I know about this story, I can go down the stalker path, but then I'm like, but then why don't we tell law enforcement? Okay, so she's in this cab. Cab driver says, I got a call. Sorry. She gets out and she's just standing on the corner, like, is not walking anywhere. A friend who had met her like once or twice sees her from across the street and he's like, oh, I think that's Emma. Let me go talk to her. And so he goes up to her and he's like, Emma, are you okay? And she's not really talking to him. He's asking her, do you want to go walk somewhere? Is somebody following you? And she's giving one word answers. He talks to her for 30 minutes to an hour. And finally, he's like, okay, I need to call for help. But he can't call because he doesn't have a cell phone either. So he has to go to a restaurant nearby to call 911 for her. Before we get to his 911 call and that police interaction, I don't think you and Emma would ever be friends because when he finds her, she is barefoot outside. What in the fuck are you doing? Like, I do like to walk barefoot from time to time. I like to stick my toes in the sand. I don't wear shoes or socks in my house, but I'm not doing that in the middle of winter in the public streets. She went shoeless almost everywhere. She never liked to wear shoes. Like even when she was back home, one of her favorite things to do was to go for walks and she like never wore shoes. All right. So he goes across the street to call 911 at about 7 p.m. and two officers show up and they talk to Emma. So he's like, okay, cool. The police got it. I'm on my merry way. Police say they spend about 45 minutes with her. When they arrive, she's in front of the Empress Hotel. They're asking her a series of questions. She tells them, I'm just working through some things right now. I'm going to be going to a friend's house. I'm fine. I'm not depressed. I'm not sad. I'm not suicidal. They ask if she's eating, if she has a place to stay. She says yes. And essentially at the end of it, they're like, okay, there's nothing to see here, so go about your way. One thing that they did get some bad publicity for, and I'm actually going to come to the police's, not rescue, but what's it called?
Defense.
Yes, thank you. It's hard for me to say those words. Later on, because spoiler alert, we're not going to see Emma after this. Emma's mom later asked the police for the transcript of this conversation. And they're like, sorry, we wrote a brief police report, but we didn't have a play-by-play because in our mind, we were just having a conversation with somebody who seemed off and then we just let her go, right? We're not writing a 4-page report on that. Now, in hindsight, they're like, well, shit, I wish we would have, but we didn't. So they make a big deal out of that, but I was like, I'm not mad at them for that. So 3 hours later, Emma's mom shows up at the women's shelter because, again, remember, she's coming to like save the day. And she goes to talk to them and she said, hey, did Emma show up? And they're like, oh, she tried to, but she missed curfew type of thing. And so then they talked to Emma's mom for a little bit and they kind of urge her to missing persons report because they also tell Emma's mom about how she was moving the furniture outside and how she was talking to herself sometimes and all these things. Now, Patty, who was Emma's friend at the shelter, said that she thought that the shelter was lying to Emma's mom that night and they were trying to cover up for not giving Emma an emergency bed that night. She does officially go reported as a missing person that night. The police come in, they start to do an investigation. They search her van the next day before they tow it away. Inside the van, they find her passport, her library card, a digital camera, a bunch of clothes, a pillow, her laptop, a lot of her journals, and then some recently checked out library books, which is why we can go back to she probably was at the library earlier that day. They do a brief search of the area. There was like a waterway that they looked into. They couldn't find her there. They question the women's shelter and essentially they come up with, well, She was having these mental health episodes, and so she probably died by suicide. 1 week after her disappearance, the prepaid card that she had purchased, remember that $200 Visa card, they found that was used to purchase cigarettes. The police traced the purchase back to a man. And he said, "Oh, I found this card in a park, maybe like 5 or 10 miles away from where she was last seen." For all intents and purposes, he's polygraphed, he passed polygraph, he's dismissed. No other things on the card are found. They searched the park area where he said he found the card. They find no signs of Emma. And so they essentially chalk this up to a dead end. So Emma's mom starts hitting the streets. She hires her own private investigator, and she's putting out these flyers offering a $25,000 reward. There's some sightings of Emma that come up from time to time. Nothing really pans out. 2 years later, there is a gentleman that they find in this store, and I'm going to share my screen one more time. Again, video has no sound. And this is in a city, I want to say like at least an hour or so away from where Emma was last seen. So this guy walks in to this clothing store. They call him the green shirt guy. So if you research this case, you find this green shirt guy. Now you see in his hand here, he has this crumpled up piece of paper, and he's kind of like going around this weird, it's weird that he's in a women's clothing store, number one. But he goes into this store with this crumpled up piece of paper, and the crumpled up piece of paper is one of the flyers that Emma's face is on. And he says to the store owner, "This is my girlfriend, and she just wants to be left alone." And he's like super angry and hostile. And then he like picks up a shirt and he says, "Oh, Emma would like this. She would love this." And he like goes out of the store. Police have never been able to track that guy down. Maybe it's something, maybe it's nothing, but just seems really odd. And again, this was 2 years later in 2014. One big piece of information that I have left out until now. Her parents were pretty adamant that a man was to blame. Julian and Emma met at an art festival. It was either late 2010 or early 2011 in her hometown on the east coast of Canada. He saw Emma from across the way and was like, "Oh my God, she's gorgeous." So he goes into this art tent and pretends to like this art so that he can talk to her. Of course, she's got this infectious personality. So they start talking, and they ended up like hanging out the whole rest of that night and started to become friends. Emma liked to take a lot of walks, so she would constantly ask Julian if he wanted to go for walks with her. They went to a concert at one point together. He says things went a little too far and they ended up making out, and she kind of like pushed away and was like, "Hey, no, I don't want this." And he started catching feelings for her quite a bit. And when she knew that she was going to move away, she had started to distance herself and say, "Hey, I don't think we should hang out as much anymore." And she's like, "Just don't call me anymore. Just we're done," right? And he got very persistent for a while. Eventually, she moved to Victoria. There were a couple times where he tried to get in contact with her and would call her house and or would email her dad and say, "Hey, have you heard from Emma? I just really want to talk to her." And they're like, "No, dude, she moved. Get over it," type of thing. Well, ironically or not ironically, he ends up moving to the west coast of Canada also in the same town. And when he's asked if, "Did you know that Emma was moving out there?" he said, "Maybe I heard her say once that she wanted to move out that way, but I didn't know where she would be." He's like, "Of course, I always thought maybe it would be awesome if I would run into her. And when I moved there, I came upon a store and I thought, Emma would like this type of store." And then he said he would visit there on a weekly basis, hoping to run into Emma, and happened to run into her one day. Her being nice, she's like, "Oh, hey, Julian, you're here now. I guess we'll hang out a time or two." And she didn't tell him where she lived, probably because she didn't know where she was going from day to day. He said, "I didn't ask her where she worked or lived. because I would have been very tempted to go to those places to see her. He even at one point had reached out to her dad and said, I don't want to seem like I'm stalking again, like I did the last time. So can you please just let her know that I'm trying to reach out to her? On the day that she went missing, he said he was driving somewhere and I think his mom was in town or something. And they had drove down this road and his mom had said to him, hey, that looks like Emma. And he's like, oh, it does. She looks kind of sad and lost. She was like, do you want to stop and talk to her? And he's like, no, 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 it's fine. He came back to that same spot later that day and she was still in the same spot. And so he talked to her. She didn't really want to talk to him. And so he went about his merry way. A year after her disappearance, the police went to revisit Julian as a suspect. They gave him a polygraph. He passed and they said, nothing to see here. We're good. This is clearly death by suicide. So she wrote this one passage, was titled From Dead Emma. And it basically started out, if you're reading this now, I've since passed on. And it went into some cryptic messages. Please put this journal entry with her mental instability and her transient way of life and said, this is obviously what happened. And other experts say, if that were so, where's the body? You don't hide a body when you die by suicide. Unfortunately, that is all we know. So I'm sure you have lots of thoughts and questions.
I know it's easy after the fact to say these things, but you obviously have several people who claim and agree that she was definitely going through a mental health situation of some sort. Why would you not try to have some sort of intervention with somebody that could help her, especially at the shelter? They had to have a situation already set up on call, like, hey, we have somebody that we need you to talk to.
I do feel like the shelter failed her for sure. But and maybe she put on a good front. Like the police talked to her for 45 minutes that night and they didn't think anything was wrong.
She didn't have shoes on. It definitely seems like there should have been somebody that was on planet Earth that was like, hey, this is not safe. This is not doing good things for you in your life. You are not going in the direction that you should be going. How long was she there again, Jamie?
So she moved to the West Coast in late 2011 and she disappeared in late 2012.
Yeah.
That's when her mental health really deteriorated. Like when she first got there, she still seemed kind of okay based on friend interviews, and then it like slowly plummeted.
Was she keeping in touch with people from back home?
From time to time, like her mom said she would hear from her maybe once a week or once every other week. One of her childhood friends said she heard from her at least once a month, maybe a couple times a month.
I'm just wondering maybe if her family and friends had been so conditioned to understand that this is just the way she wants to live. I'm, again, inserting myself. I would be like, I don't care how simple you want to live. You do not have a home. You are going to have a cell phone or something to that effect.
Especially if it's true that she was being stalked. Like, how awful to not have a place to call. And I guess in that case, maybe you don't want a place to call home, but like, you have no sense of anything for yourself other than your van. You just constantly feel like you're running all the time.
I, at this point, am not seeing anything crazy from this Julian person. One, we don't know, did he go there specifically to follow her? Two, even if he did, we don't know that he wanted to hurt her.
He definitely had this obsessive nature with her. He said that sentence where I didn't ask where she lived or worked because I knew I would go there all the fucking time, right? He clearly was obsessed with her. He went into the store hoping that she'd be there someday. I will put $1 million down to say that he went to the West Coast in that town because he knew she talked about it one day.
It's a very unlike me thing to say, but could it have been a situation where he just never got the type of closure that he needed? And if I run into her, oh, we're going to have that fairy tale and it's going to be magical. And all we needed was just to see each other one more time.
I can kind of see that. Like,
And I feel like a lot of the things that you're telling me he said is coming from her family.
No, he said these things. He did an interview with the podcast I listened to. That sentence that he said was verbatim. He said that. He's like, I didn't move out there to go see her, but maybe I heard her say it in passing. He said that he saw that store and that it was a store that she liked. He said that he didn't ask her where she worked or lived because he would be too tempted to go there. Julian did an interview and Julian said all of those things.
How much time had passed before they ran into each other to she disappeared?
I don't have a specific time written down, but I would say months, like 2, 3, 4 months from the first time that he ran into her, in quotes, in that store. My friends at True Crime Garage said, you don't have so many coincidences that happen at once, though. Like, he coincidentally moved across the country and moved into the same city that she did. He coincidentally ran into her in the store. He coincidentally saw her on the day that she went missing.
His mom corroborated his story, right?
Mom was not with him when he then went and saw her later. His mom was with him when they drove by her and saw her on the street. And she's like, oh, do you want to stop? That's Emma. Almost like I think of when I was younger and I would tell my mom, oh, I have a crush on that boy. And I would maybe exaggerate the story and she'd be like, ooh, there's that boy. Do you want to go talk? No, I don't want to fucking talk to him. We're not actually like that, but I can't tell my mom, right? I'm not faulting him for going up and talking to her at that point. I'm saying all those coincidences at the same time, like, come on, man. He called himself a stalker. He told her dad, I don't want to come off as being a stalker like I did last time. Now he comes in and claims later that he doesn't know the English language very well, and so he didn't really quite know what stalker meant when he said it that time.
I think if you're a stalker and you know you're a stalker, you're not going to say that you're a stalker.
Okay, let's remember Joseph D'Angelo. Was he not in the community police meeting where they were talking about the rapists in the neighborhood? Do you make yourself so vividly seen that you are not looked at as a suspect? The person who killed her would never show up to her searches. The person that killed her would never do this. The person that raped everybody would never come to the community meeting about it.
If he was looked into even a year after the disappearance, I'm sure he was ripped apart even more.
He was. People came for him, for sure. But the police dismissed him as a suspect, so there's nothing you can do. But her parents are still very adamant. Her mom even at one point said, Julian, tell me you didn't move here because Emma was here. And he's like, I didn't. I had no idea what you're talking about.
That doesn't prove that he killed her.
No, I don't have proof. He's not getting convicted of murder tonight.
All of these calls between Emma and her mom,
something had to have been going on, right?
You would ask follow-up questions.
So she claimed she was trying not to be intrusive and she just wanted to give her a safe space.
Okay, but after like day one, I'm just gonna go.
Yeah, so it's like the priceless piece of it all. Like, why didn't you just go try and find him? Why didn't you just go day one? If you're interested in this, I highly recommend you to go spend 10 hours and listen to all 10 parts. But Shelley was interviewed in the very first episode, and she states that her family kind of pushed her, like, leave Emma be type of thing. But none of her other family was ever questioned and said, if that's Emma's decision, then you should let that be Emma's decision, and it's fine. You shouldn't go out there if she didn't ask you to go out there. That's why she said, I hesitated because I was just trying to let her live her own life. Again, she's 26, right? I would like to think if I called my parents when I was 26 years old and I was crying that they would say, I don't give a fuck, I'm coming anyways.
Okay, so maybe you scratch the first call after you get the, I'm just kidding, everything is fine, I was just, whatever, having a day. But once it continues to happen.
Yeah, and I think that's why the last day she was like, fuck this, I'm just going. But maybe she should have went a day or two earlier. But even if she did, would the events played out the same? Because it still took her 12 hours to get there, right? It's not like she could immediately hang up the phone and hop on a flight and be there in 4 hours.
After the second occurrence, I'm done.
Yeah.
Add to the fact that these calls are being made from a women's shelter.
At the time, her mom didn't know that she was living in a women's shelter. The name of the women's shelter was Sandy Merriman. So when the calls came through, it came through as Sandy Merriman. So her mom thought it was a friend named Sandy. And it wasn't until she got there that she was like, oh, let me put 2 and 2 together. Shit, this is a women's shelter. Because at one point, Emma said I can't let you see me like this, or I'm not good enough, or something to that extent. People speculate because she was maybe ashamed of living in the women's shelter, or ashamed that she didn't have a place of her own, and so maybe didn't want her mom to come and see that. And so that's why maybe she was trying to go to the airport that day, because she was like, oh, my mom told me she would have a ticket waiting for me there. Maybe at worst case scenario, the ticket's not still there, and I can just go to the airport and call my mom and she can buy me one. Or I could put it on my card and my
No, that
parents will
doesn't make
reimburse
sense.
me.
Because at that point, she thought her mom was on her way there and was
Some
trying to run away from that.
A couple sources that said that somebody told her that her mom was coming, but then some other sources say that she didn't know. It wasn't officially written in a police report because her mom didn't say I'm coming. She just hung up the phone with Emma that morning and decided her on her own that she's coming.
I think that a lot of people failed is a harsh word, but I think there should have been some guardrails. If you have somebody who is typically speaking in riddles and sounds like she's kind of always floating a couple
Yeah,
feet above the ground, there should have been more mindfulness about her state of mind and her state of living. I think sometimes you can't just say, oh, that's just Emma.
right.
If there's any situation where it leaves the door open to think it was just clearly a suicide, that should never happen. I feel like things could have been put in place to avoid where it ended up. If that's how they always knew her, there probably should have been some sort of treatment plan even before she moved to kind of assess, is something going on? Are you
Why
a
do you want to move across
danger?
country? Yeah.
Are you a danger to yourself to go somewhere to start this new adventure, not planning to do it in any stable sort of way?
Maybe she gave her family like this false sense of hope of like, oh yeah, I'm gonna stay here and I'm gonna try to go to school here. And they were like, oh, okay, seems great.
I hope that was the case. There had to be signs of decline.
Like even in the few times that if she wrote you an email once a week, you had to have seen something. Or the few times that she called you.
I'm assuming that you were trying to lead me to Julian.
A little, yeah, but there's so many other things. My question to you is, even if we are glad to Julian, why do we have the cell phone and the prepaid card?
Did the cell phone ever get activated?
No, so that was something I forgot to mention. The cell phone never got activated. It was never found. The card we know about, and then her funds in her bank account were never touched, and her email was never accessed again.
Unless she did a really good job of fooling a lot of people, I don't think that this is someone who set up this elaborate plan to disappear and start anew somewhere else. Otherwise, give her like an Emmy, Oscar, all of them. I don't think that is the case at all. As far as suicide, if she wouldn't even eat a piece of fruit unless a tree told her to, I don't think
Right.
self-harm, even though the barefoot, that's self-harm, but it doesn't yell to me, this is a person who would end her life.
I go back to, and I know people who die by suicide still make future plans, but she went to the library and checked out books. She went and got a YMCA membership. Would you do those things if you want to die by suicide? Probably not.
It's totally possible that when she went to the shelter and was turned away, she just hit a wall.
And then where's the body? You can't hide your own body.
But then again, if you have money in your bank, you can go get a room.
If you're that hard up, right? I don't care how much I was trying to save for this trip. I can just call my dad and say, hey, shit was hard for a day. I need $300.
3 grand, that's a fortune compared to more money. You could go find
I,
somewhere to live for a month. Like,
yeah.
but also, all of your belongings are in this van. You've got a laptop. She had resources.
And if you really were gonna run away, wouldn't you take your passport?
Could she have frozen to death somewhere? And you said it was December.
November. But yeah, if somebody went missing in Milwaukee and they froze to death, eventually somebody's going to find that body. In 12 fucking years, we're going to find something. I guess it's plausible that animals came across the bones and they're scattered, or homeless person, drunk person found a body and threw it in a garbage can.
It would be great if we had some more evidence for Julian. Did he move out there because she was there? It sounds like probably, because once he got there, he was actively trying to run into her. But if that is the case and you truly are so scared of something happening to you, she didn't take any steps to protect herself.
Yeah, I don't know if she didn't feel safe going to the police or didn't feel like anybody would believe her or just thought maybe she ran into him the one time and it was fine. He doesn't sit right with me. I hate some of the things he said. I hate that he ended up there with no good fucking reason other than I just got a bug up my ass and wanted to move away. He seemed so obsessive with her, almost to the point of like the show You. I briefly talked about how she stayed on this guy's houseboat from time to time because she worked at the restaurant that was right there. They were like friends, but nothing ever happened between them. It was literally like she would pass out on his couch maybe 3 nights. What if he was this You type stalker and was like, oh my God, she left the restaurant and went to this guy's houseboat. She can't be with anybody else. I need her to be with me. And so he made this elaborate plan and ended up somehow killing her. I go back to my whole, there's too many coincidences. And if one of the best ways to paint yourself not a victim is to become involved in the search and become that concerned person. And this guy is so concerned. He's searching for her. He's there. He's agreeing to polygraphs. He's being cooperative with police. It couldn't have been him.
She didn't do herself any favors if it was him. Why don't you go back home? She didn't have a job. She didn't have a house. She didn't have anything tying her there anymore.
Pride.
Or tell somebody at the shelter so that if anything, that guarantees you a spot for the night.
Right. No matter what, just keep this one spot open for me because this guy's following me.
Going up.
But maybe the shelter looked at it as, to play devil's advocate with it, we have all these mentally unstable people here. They all tell me crazy shit all the time. I don't know what's true and what's not, so I just got to take it at face value. And whoever comes here by curfew gets a bet, and whoever doesn't, doesn't.
And you probably do get desensitized to things
Yeah.
at the shelter because you probably are dealing with a fair amount of people who are not
I mean,
fully stable in one capacity or another, whether that's by choice. She didn't do a good job of asking for help.
maybe it was like the world's not speaking to me to ask for help.
If we even have that as a checklist item, the world has to speak to you to tell you if it's okay or not okay to do something. That's already a red flag for me that there's something going on that was not okay.
Yeah, 1,000,000%. It also could have been a manic episode where she did something crazy. But again, if that was the case, we'd find a body. I keep going back to this card and the cell phone are like driving me crazy. She's very purposeful. She went into the 7-Eleven. She knew what she was doing. She bought these things on the same day and the same day that she's trying to go to the airport to get away. What if she, in her transient lifestyle, met somebody who was like, hey, we can go have this great life. I just need you to get a jump start, go buy these untraceable things so that we can go disappear into this new life. And one of three things happened. She got met with foul play on the way to meet whoever she was going to meet, and she was murdered. Somebody sexually assaulted her, thought she had money, robbed her, and she met her demise that way. Or could it have been along the same lines, but part of the plan was maybe for her to go to the airport and she chickened out? Or could it really be that she did go live this grand life somewhere else and she is still alive somewhere? That's probably very unlikely, especially given that the cell phone was never activated and the card was found in a park.
Out of all the things that you've told me tonight, not once have I heard anybody mention that said, no, she really had her shit together. She was fine. It was
No.
murmuring to herself, making leaf
Patterns.
the world speaking to her.
No shoes, going for walks all the time,
Oh my
not
gosh.
wanting a house.
How was no shoes not number one? I don't think she was well.
The diet alone, if you are starving yourself of that many nutrients, that would make your mind go crazy in itself. And then you don't have a stable place to go to.
I don't think she was well, and I think there are many people who should have picked that up before I did.
She somewhat had her shit together back home. She wasn't as off the mental stability train as she was when she moved, but she was still like that artsy fartsy type of person that would, speak in poems and didn't like cell phones. That to me would be a dead giveaway. If Grayson comes up to me in 2 years and he's like, oh, I don't want a cell phone anymore, I don't need it. What's wrong with you? Yes, you do. That is part of normal fucking life. And so I would probably monitor his actions from there on out. I know I can't tell a 26-year-old what to do, but I would be very nervous and skeptical about them moving across the country. And so if we want to get really crazy, maybe she had something out there that she was moving to. Maybe something was speaking to her out there. My number one, Julian, I just don't like it. I don't like him. I don't like that he's out there. I don't like that he couldn't ask her where she worked because he couldn't keep hands off her. I don't like that he called himself a stalker. I don't like that he saw her the day she went missing. None of it.
I don't like it either. I just need some more.
Yeah, I do too.
It feels like he is low-hanging fruit at this point.
It gives me Phoebe vibes because the cops came in and they're like, okay, suicide, goodbye. Nobody wanted to go down the rabbit holes. Her mom was the only one, she hired her own private investigators. And there is a documentary that has been years and years in the making. It's called Barefoot in the Night, I believe, the Emma Fillipoff story. It was supposed to be released last year, but they're still working on some things that hopefully will be coming out next year, 2026. So that will maybe lead some more insight into some things.
Yeah, maybe we can do an update where I have changed my mind.
Well, to wrap us up, when Emma was last seen, she was 26 years old. She was a white female with blonde hair. She was 5'5" and weighed about 90 pounds. So if you know anything about Emma's disappearance, we strongly urge you to contact the Victoria Police Department's non-emergency police line at 250-995-7654. And until we know more details, all we can do is speculate wildly.